The moment I saw Karen dragging a margarita machine across my field in stilettos, followed by a DJ, 6 fold-out tables, and what looked like a man in a taco costume, I knew 2 things. First, this woman had finally lost her last functioning brain cell, and second, she was about to blow an entire federal operation to hell. I hadn't even finished my morning coffee when my phone buzzed with a live alert from the hidden drone camera I had perched in the oak tree at the corner of the property. It sent a real-time view of 100 strangers, tents, coolers, alcohol barrels, and one highly suspicious white catering van with no plate. That van wasn't just any food truck. It belonged to Vito Morelli, the exact man my team had been surveilling for 18 months. A caterer who cooked ribs by day and laundered money by night. And now, thanks to HOA Karen's idea of light afternoon fun, he was setting up shop right in the middle of my undercover field, while I stood there in sweatpants holding a rake, watching my entire career flash before my eyes. Just 3 months earlier, I moved into this HOA-governed suburb with the goal of blending in, keeping my head down, and using the property as a staging ground for the sting operation. As a federal agent, I was undercover, officially listed as a freelance cybersecurity consultant. The quiet neighborhood was perfect. It had a golf course, walking paths, and exactly the kind of nosy neighbors who stayed busy gossiping instead of asking real questions. That was until Karen, president of the HOA, introduced herself by showing up at my door unannounced with a clipboard, a fruitcake, and a 14-point list of things wrong with my lawn aesthetics. I had the audacity to grow native grasses instead of planting HOA-approved Bermuda sod, which apparently triggered some kind of emotional spiral in her. From that moment on, she declared war. And I made the mistake of ignoring her, until today. My property includes a 3-acre open field that I specifically chose for its privacy and clear lines of sight. To me, it was tactical terrain. To Karen, it was wasted community space. I'd caught her multiple times walking along the perimeter, taking photos, making little note. Last week, she left a flyer in my mailbox for a community barbecue social, claiming it was just a few families, and that I was invited to observe if I felt shy. I texted her immediately, hard no. This land was private. Zoned for agricultural use. I told her plainly, not available for parties, not even for her geriatric book club. She didn't respond. I should have known silence meant she was about to detonate something outrageous. This morning, it became clear that Karen had completely ignored every boundary and forged ahead with her party. Not only had she invaded my land, but she'd also brought alcohol, hired entertainment, and most critically, contracted Vito Morelli. He was the cherry-glazed nail in the coffin. Vito had been off the grid for weeks, lying low after a warehouse seizure in Arizona. We had no idea where he'd resurfaced, until now. And here he was, flipping burgers and handing out pulled pork sliders 20 feet from my surveillance shed. I jogged toward the chaos, trying to stay calm, trying not to blow my cover. Karen saw me coming and waved as if we were besties. Alex, isn't this fabulous? I knew you'd love it once you saw it in action. I stared at her, stunned. She wore a sash that said, Barbecue Queen, and sunglasses shaped like flamingos. Karen, I said as evenly as I could, we had a conversation. This is trespassing. There are over 100 people on my private land. She scoffed and tossed her blonde bob like we were arguing about patio furniture. It's not trespassing when it's for the greater good. The community needed this. She gestured dramatically to the open bar and the dance floor where someone's toddler was twerking to Pitbull. Meanwhile, I noticed Vito locking up the catering van, eyes scanning the crowd, clearly uncomfortable. He didn't recognize me yet, but if he looked too long, he might. I ducked behind a makeshift tiki bar to observe. My earpiece was already in. I whispered to my surveillance team, confirming Vito's ID. We weren't ready for a takedown yet, too risky in public, too many civilians. But we could gather intel. I pulled out my phone and snapped quick photos, captured license plates, recorded soundbite. My gut told me Karen's catering deal wasn't just a favor, this was deeper. As the party roared on, I realized the horror didn't stop at illegal alcohol and unauthorized vendors. Someone had set up a fireworks station. Real fireworks, with teenagers running it. There were kids holding sparklers near dry brush, an open flame next to a propane tank, and a karaoke booth blaring off-key renditions of Bon Jovi. I scanned the scene in disbelief. This wasn't a neighborhood gathering. This was a liability waiting to make national news. And it was happening on my property, while I was actively embedded in a federal operation. Karen popped back into my line of sight, carrying 2 margaritas. "Here," she said cheerfully, "one for you. Vito makes them strong. He's such a gem, isn't he? I got him a bunch of contracts around the neighborhood. He's so grateful." That was the moment my blood ran cold. She wasn't just casually involved. She had leverage over him. She was working him into the community, possibly laundering HOA funds through his catering business. She wasn't a clueless busybody. She was a potential co-conspirator. I handed the drink back and stepped away. My cover was thin ice now. If Karen was involved, this could compromise everything. But I couldn't blow the op yet. I needed to let her think she was still in control, still playing queen of her HOA fantasyland. Fine. Let her party. Let her run her mouth. Let her tangle herself in a web so big, even her sash and flamingo shades couldn't save her. Because I wasn't just her neighbor. I wasn't just the guy with the ugly native grass lawn. I was a federal agent, and Karen had just invited a kingpin to her backyard bash, on top of federal land, in front of a live wire. This wasn't just a neighborhood scandal anymore. This was the beginning of a full-blown takedown. And Karen? She was about to learn the hard way what happens when you throw a party on the wrong person's property. Vito Morelli wasn't the kind of man you'd expect to see at a suburban block party, but there he was in the middle of my field wearing an apron that said, "Brisket Daddy," and spinning ribs over a portable smoker like this was just another Saturday gig. To everyone else, he looked like a local barbecue hero. To me, he was a federal ghost, one of the most elusive laundering agents on the West Coast, running stolen government funds through catering shells, event contracts, and consulting deals that never actually consulted anything. We'd been chasing his trail for over a year, and every time we got close, he vanished behind a fake name and a food truck. That is, until Karen decided she wanted to throw a hoedown on federal bait ground and casually invited him in like he was her nephew home from culinary school. From a distance, Vito seemed relaxed, chatting with neighbors, high-fiving teenagers, and handing out samples of his signature peach-glazed ribs. But I knew better. I watched the twitch in his eyes when someone mentioned permits. I caught the way his hand never left his phone, thumb constantly scrolling, like he was checking something more important than the guest list. He was on edge. He wasn't here for the community vibe. He was conducting business, probably laundering thousands right in front of everyone through overpriced catering invoices signed under the table. Karen, oblivious or pretending to be, floated around the party like she was running for office. She wore a barbecue tiara now, yes, an actual plastic tiara with grill tools glued to it, and kept making announcements over a speaker system about raffle prizes and supporting local vendors like our dear friend Vito. She was drunk on power, literally and figuratively. The fact that she'd not only brought him into the community but was publicly promoting him set off every alarm in my head. I needed to know just how deep she was in this. I made my way over to the food truck line, careful not to draw too much attention. As I reached the front, I gave Vito a nod and asked how long he'd been catering HOA event. He looked up, squinting, trying to place my face. I saw the flicker of recognition. Maybe he'd seen me at the docks last year, or maybe my voice rang a bell from one of the intercepted calls. But he played it cool. "Oh, here and there," he said with a toothy grin, slapping a mound of pulled pork onto a bun. "Word of mouth. You know how these suburban types are. Throw a few ribs their way and suddenly you're the mayor." I laughed politely and asked if he ever did corporate gigs. He tilted his head, gauging the question. Depends on the company, he said slowly. Gotta know who I'm cooking for. I nodded, planting the bait. I've got some folks looking for someone discreet for private functions. Off-the-books types. Big spenders. No receipts. His eyebrows rose just a touch, enough to tell me I had his attention. He leaned in slightly and said, "Give me a number. We'll talk." That was all I needed. I reached into my back pocket and handed him a burner business card with a fake consulting firm and a monitored phone line. If he called, we'd have a trace. If he texted, we'd have evidence. He slipped it into his apron without breaking eye contact, then handed me a sandwich wrapped in foil. "On the house," he said. "For being a man who appreciates brisket done right." As I walked away, I scanned the party again. Karen was now leading a conga line, screaming lyrics to Sweet Caroline, while holding a plastic goblet the size of a birdbath. A few of the other board members were visibly uncomfortable. One woman, Linda from the architectural committee, was pacing by the edge of the field on her phone. I suspected she wasn't calling for more ice. There were cracks in the facade. Not everyone was on board with this circus, and that could work in my favor. By mid-afternoon, the party had shifted from cheerful chaos to borderline anarchy. The portable bathrooms were overflowing. Kids were throwing cornhole bags at each other's heads. One guy fell into my garden bed and passed out on a pile of kale. And still, Karen pranced around like a demented event planner. I needed to keep gathering intel, but I couldn't risk being out in the open much longer. So I slipped behind the catering van while Vito was distracted and opened the side door, just enough to slide my phone under a crate and activate the hidden mic app. It was risky, but it was the only way we'd catch any incriminating audio. I left the phone running and closed the door silently. Back at my shed, I tuned into the live feed from the mic and heard muffled voices. Vito talking to someone about invoices and bulk meat not matching the order forms. Bingo. It wasn't solid proof yet, but it confirmed my suspicion that his operation was still active. If Karen was knowingly funneling HOA money to him, this whole event could be used as part of the indictment. Later that evening, as people stumbled home with sunburns and half-eaten potato salad, I finally got a moment to breathe. I walked the perimeter of the field, assessing the damage. Trash everywhere. Burn marks on the grass. My fence knocked over in 2 places. I'd warned her. I had it in writing. This wasn't just a party. It was a coordinated operation that compromised a federal investigation, and now I had to clean it up in more ways than one. That night, just as I was reviewing the audio recordings and prepping a report for my supervisor, I heard a knock on the door. It was Linda. Her eyes were wide, and she held a small envelope. "I shouldn't be here," she said, voice trembling. "But you need to see this." She handed me the envelope and left without another word. Inside were photocopies of checks made out from the HOA fund to fake businesses, all routed to accounts linked to Vito's catering company. Most damningly, several were signed by Karen herself. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. This wasn't just speculation anymore. This was a paper trail. She wasn't some clueless control freak who stumbled into federal waters. She was neck-deep in it, swimming lap. And she just handed me the final piece I needed to crack this case wide open. 3 days after the now infamous barbecue fiasco, the HOA meeting was called in the community clubhouse, a space that usually reeked of lemon-scented pledge and passive aggression. But tonight the tension was electric. Word had spread fast, and half the neighborhood showed up. Some were still buzzing from the party, excited to turn it into an annual Karen Fest. Others were fuming, demanding answers about property destruction, noise complaints, underage drinking, and how on earth a full-scale alcohol-fueled carnival had appeared on someone else's private land. Karen, naturally, had prepared a statement. She sat at the front of the room, flanked by 2 of her favorite board members, wearing a red blazer and a smug smile, like she was running a press conference and not, in fact, standing on the edge of scandal. She opened the meeting with faux grace, thanking everyone for their community spirit, and then diving straight into the heart of it. How the recent gathering was a spontaneous celebration that brought the neighborhood together during difficult times. She claimed it was approved by an internal consensus, and that the event had only grown unexpectedly large due to word of mouth. Then came the pivot. She turned toward me, her tone shifting. "Unfortunately," she said, loud enough for the back row to hear, "a certain resident has taken it upon himself to exaggerate and escalate what was clearly meant to be a joyful occasion." Every eye in the room turned to me. I didn't flinch. Karen went on, insinuating I'd overreacted, possibly due to antisocial behavior and a lack of community integration. She even floated the idea that I'd intentionally called in complaints to sabotage her event. It was a bold play, trying to paint herself as the martyr and me as the villain. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had a bombshell sitting in my jacket pocket. When she finished, I waited for a beat, then stood up calmly. "I appreciate your creativity, Karen," I said, voice steady, "but I'm afraid you've mistaken me for someone who plays by HOA rules." A few gasps, some chuckles. I walked to the front and held up a flash drive. "I'd like to share some information with the board, information that I believe is highly relevant to this discussion." Karen's eyes narrowed. "This isn't part of the agenda," she said quickly, but the room was already too curious. The vice president, clearly tired of Karen's dominance, nodded for me to proceed. I plugged the drive into the clubhouse laptop and projected the first file. Drone footage from my field, captured during the barbecue. A bird's-eye view of the chaos, Vito's unmarked van, the open alcohol bars, the fireworks shooting near propane tanks, and Karen herself leading the charge like a parade marshal in a bad sitcom. The room erupted. People gasped, some covered their mouth. I let the footage play for a few more seconds before switching to audio. Vito's voice from the wiretap in his van, casually discussing falsified invoices and bulk meat orders not matching the purchase record. Then came the final act. I pulled out copies of the checks Linda had delivered, displaying them on the screen. Karen's signature. HOA funds. Payments to shell companies tied to Vito's catering operation. Karen stood abruptly. "This is outrageous," she snapped, but her voice cracked. "You're invading my privacy. This is illegal surveillance." I turned to her, keeping my expression unreadable. "Actually, Karen, it's a lot more legal than signing off on laundering HOA money through a fraudulent business." The board went silent. Then murmurs. Then questions. The vice president leaned forward and asked Karen directly if she authorized the payment. She stumbled, offered a half-hearted explanation about expediting services for community benefit, and then blamed accounting miscommunication. No one bought it. The room had flipped. But things weren't done spiraling. Halfway through the chaos, someone in the back stood up. It was Greg, a quiet guy who mostly kept to himself. He held up his phone and said, "I got this email from Karen's office 2 weeks ago. She promised Vito exclusive catering rights to all HOA events through 2025 if he provided discounts and discretion." He forwarded it to the board on the spot. Karen turned pale. A vote was called right then and there. Emergency motion to suspend Karen from her role pending an internal audit. The board passed it with a split vote. 2 of her cronies clung on, but the rest saw the writing on the wall. Karen sat down in stunned silence, face stiff, lips pressed tight like she was trying to hold in a scream. She didn't yell, didn't storm out. She just sat there, watching the empire she'd micromanaged for years collapse in front of her. After the meeting, people approached me one by one, some thanking me, some still wary, but all clearly shaken. The image of Karen, the once untouchable HOA queen, dethroned by her own arrogance, was almost too surreal to process. Linda found me near the coffee station and whispered, "You just did what no one thought was possible." I nodded, but my mind was already moving ahead. This wasn't over. That night, back at home, I sifted through more audio from Vito's van. One clip stood out. He mentioned an upcoming event, larger than the last one. Karen was planning something else. A fundraiser. Same setup, same vendor, bigger guests. And based on the date, it was only 10 days away. She might have lost the HOA title, but she wasn't done yet. Whatever she had planned next was happening off the books, and that meant it was even more dangerous. Karen wasn't just a suburban tyrant drunk on power. She was reckless, determined, and now desperate. She had ties to a criminal laundering ring, and she was still pulling strings behind the scenes. I realized I couldn't wait any longer. It was time to set the trap. If she wanted to play dirty, fine. I'd let her walk right into it. Because the next event she hosted wouldn't be a party. It would be a sting. And this time, she wouldn't be dancing with a margarita in hand. She'd be answering questions in an interrogation room. The plan came together faster than I expected. As soon as I confirmed the date of Karen's next event, what she was now calling a private HOA fundraising banquet for neighborhood beautification, I contacted my handler and briefed the task force. We'd let her believe she still had control, still held influence, and still had Vito in her back pocket. That illusion would be her downfall. The operation was greenlit under the codename Operation Brisket Bait. We were going to let her walk straight into the trap she'd set for herself, and this time, there would be no HOA technicalities to hide behind. Over the next week, Karen became strangely quiet, which made her all the more dangerous. She stopped her usual routine of marching around with a clipboard and measuring people's grass blade. Instead, she worked behind the scenes, sending encrypted emails, making quiet phone calls from a burner phone, and setting up the event at a private property just outside the neighborhood, a place she claimed belonged to a family friend. In reality, it was an abandoned farmhouse that had been foreclosed on 2 years prior. The perfect location for an off-the-books gathering. No permits, no paper trail, no oversight. My team began laying the groundwork. Undercover agents were embedded as guests, posing as wealthy potential donors from other neighborhoods. Others posed as vendors, staff, and even local musicians. Every entry point had surveillance. The catering van would be bugged again. The money exchanges would be monitored. If Vito or Karen made a single mistake, we'd have them both, this time with hard evidence. Karen, ever the performer, couldn't resist adding flair. Invitations were printed on heavy card stock and handed out discreetly to hand-picked residents and select contributors. No public flyers. No open invites. She knew she had eyes on her now, and she was trying to keep it tight. The guest list included several business owners, 3 minor city officials, and 2 developers with histories of shady contract work. Vito was listed as the exclusive caterer, under a fake company name. The event's theme was rustic chic, which apparently meant hay bales, expensive whiskey, and soft jazz under fairy lights. It was all so perfectly manicured and manipulative, I almost had to admire the effort. When the day finally arrived, I dressed in full character. Designer blazer, casual slacks, sunglasses that looked expensive enough to not ask questions. My cover identity was Carter Reynolds, a real estate consultant with interest in off-market development deals. My job was simple: mingle, observe, and keep Karen talking. The agents handled the rest. I arrived at the venue just as the sun dipped below the trees. The place was decked out like a Pinterest board, lanterns hanging from rafters, white tents glowing from inside, long tables dressed in burlap runners and mason jar centerpieces. There was a registration booth staffed by 2 young women in matching flannel shirts who handed out name tags and drink tickets like it was a wedding. I scanned the crowd and spotted Vito by the grill, flipping steaks like nothing in the world could touch him. Karen stood near the center, surrounded by admirers, laughing and tossing her hair like the last 3 weeks hadn't happened. When she saw me, her expression faltered for just a second before recovering into a smirk. "Carter," she said, sashaying over. "So glad you made it. I know things got a little heated last time, But I promise this is a much more refined affair. I smiled politely. Always appreciate a good fundraiser. Especially when the company is this charming. She practically preened at the compliment, then launched into a speech about community development and legacy. I let her talk, nodding at all the right moments, while keeping one eye on the agents disguised as guests, already drifting through the crowd with hidden earpieces and cameras disguised in their lapels. As the night went on, the vibe shifted from casual to transactional. People moved into small groups, talking numbers, deals, donations. Karen made introductions, dropping hints about fast-tracked zoning approvals and priority contracts for loyal contributors. Then came the big moment, the auction. On the surface, it was innocent enough. Local artwork, donated gift baskets, even a wine-tasting weekend. But hidden in the fine print of the silent bid sheets were coded terms. Land package was actually a deal for illegal soil dumping right. Historic property sponsorship was a payout for hush-hush demolition permits. It was all there, right out in the open, written in soft calligraphy and dipped in fraud. At the same time, Vito moved back and forth between the serving tables and his van, exchanging envelopes with a select few guests, each time logging names in a ledger that we now had a live feed of, thanks to the bug I'd planted earlier. The pieces were falling into place perfectly. Karen floated from donor to donor like a political butterfly, unaware that every word she spoke was being recorded, every handshake documented, every false promise stitched into a case that would unravel her entire empire. I made my way back to her near the end of the night, when she was more relaxed, drink in hand, heels kicked off, laughing with a group of city hopefuls. I leaned in and said, "You really know how to pull people together. Impressive." She winked. "Connections are everything, Carter. You scratch a few backs, grease a few palms, and suddenly the whole system works for you." I raised my glass. To the system. That was the final nail. Seconds later, the music stopped. The lights cut. For a moment, everything froze. Then came the sirens, low, rising, and unmistakable. Black SUVs rolled in through the gate. Flashlights swept the grounds. A booming voice called out over a megaphone, "Federal agents! Everyone stay where you are!" Chaos erupted. Guests stumbled. Some tried to run. Vito made it 6 steps toward the woods before 2 agents tackled him. Karen didn't move. She just stood there, blinking, lips parted like she couldn't understand what was happening. When the lead agent approached her with cuffs, she actually laughed, thinking it was some elaborate prank. It wasn't. The guests were escorted out one by one, most still trying to process what had happened. Vito was shoved into a van, already yelling about lawyers. Karen was read her rights while wearing a sequined cardigan and holding a mason jar of sangria. As she passed me, now back in full federal agent mode, our eyes met. Her smile vanished completely. "You," she hissed. "You tricked me." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The sting had worked. Back at HQ, the evidence was compiled, statements collected, charges filed. Fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, misuse of HOA funds, violation of zoning laws. The list went on. We had her. We had them all. And it had all started with a stolen barbecue on a stolen field. The fallout from the sting hit the neighborhood like a lightning strike in a drought. One moment, Karen was queen of the cul-de-sac, and the next, her face was plastered across local news broadcasts under the headline, "HOA President Indicted in Federal Laundering Scheme." The footage of her being walked out in handcuffs, barefoot and mascara smeared, made the rounds in every group chat within a 10-mile radius. People who used to nod politely now spoke in hushed whispers about what she really did behind the scenes. And the HOA? It imploded overnight. Meetings were cancelled, board members resigned, and the clubhouse was locked indefinitely pending investigation. It was as if someone had yanked the curtain back on the whole facade, and everyone finally saw what had been festering underneath. Vito flipped first. Faced with a wall of federal charges and the possibility of spending the next 30 years in a concrete box, He gave up every name, every transaction, every detail. He admitted to laundering over $4 million through catering businesses, subcontracting fraud, and HOA sweetheart deals. He confirmed Karen's involvement, explaining how she approached him after a 4th of July picnic and offered him a mutually beneficial arrangement. She'd supply the events and funding. He'd kick back 30% under the table and make the books look clean. He even handed over a burner phone filled with text messages and voice recordings, each one a nail in Karen's already collapsing coffin. Karen's legal team tried to spin it. They said she was manipulated, unaware of the extent of the operation, a community leader in over her head. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forged invoices, the altered minutes from board meetings, the secret accounts she opened under the guise of beautification grants. Her voice on tape joking about creative accounting. No jury was going to see her as a victim. She was the architect, the mastermind of a suburban empire built on brisket, lies, and unchecked entitlement. As for me, I stayed quiet. The agency wanted to issue a press release, but I declined. Let the neighborhood believe I was just a lucky homeowner who happened to record the right moment. The truth was buried under clearance levels, and that's where it would stay. My identity as a federal agent remained classified. To most, I was still the guy with the weird field and the native grasses who somehow took down the HOA without lifting a finger. That suited me just fine. In the weeks that followed, a temporary committee was formed to restructure the HOA. They begged me to be part of it, offered to waive fees and give me some ridiculous title like Operations Oversight Advisor, but I turned it down. I'd had enough HOA politics to last a lifetime. Still, I offered a suggestion. Hire a third-party mediator to keep future presidents from turning into miniature dictators. They took the advice and even implemented a new bylaw requiring all financial transactions to be publicly accessible to residents. Karen's little empire had left a legacy, not the one she wanted, but maybe the one the community needed. My field, once trashed and trampled, slowly returned to normal. I reseeded the grass, reinforced the fence, and added a few cameras, this time not hidden. People now respected the boundary. Some even stopped by just to thank me. One guy, Bob from 3 houses down, brought a 6-pack and told me he'd been trying to expose Karen for years but didn't know how. Others shared stories of fines they were unfairly slapped with, rules Karen invented on the fly, and shady deals they'd always suspected but couldn't prove. The neighborhood had been living under her thumb for so long, most had forgotten what normal even looked like. Then, one afternoon, I got another envelope under my door. No name, no return address, just a note inside that read, "Thank you for finishing what I started." Attached was a flash drive. I loaded it up and found years of data, emails, voice memos, and documentation that clearly came from someone on the inside. It was everything Karen had done long before the barbecue. It wasn't from Linda. This was someone deeper, someone who had stayed in the shadows. I never found out who it was, but I didn't need to. Whoever they were, they had tried to stop her quietly and failed. I just happened to be the storm that finally broke the dam. A few months later, Karen was sentenced. 5 years in federal prison with no parole, plus restitution payments to the HOA for misuse of funds. She sobbed in court, gave a weak apology, and claimed she had only ever wanted to bring people together. The judge didn't buy it. Neither did anyone else. Her property was sold to cover legal fees, and she vanished from the neighborhood like a bad dream. The tiara, the clipboards, the flamethrower of passive aggression, gone. The final twist came on a Monday morning when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a literary agent. Somehow, somewhere, someone had pitched my story to a publisher. Not the classified parts, obviously, but the civilian version. The guy with the lawn. The party. The barbecue that unraveled a criminal enterprise. They wanted to option it as a book. Maybe even a limited series. I laughed out loud and asked who put them up to it, but the agent wouldn't say. All they said was, It's too good not to tell. I didn't say yes. Not right away. But I didn't say no either. In the end, the neighborhood healed. Slowly, awkwardly, but honestly. The board was rebuilt with transparency. Residents started looking out for each other instead of tattling. The clubhouse reopened, not for power plays but for potlucks. And me? I finally got to enjoy the field I bought in peace. No parties, no fireworks, no illegal taco truck. Just grass, quiet, and the occasional chuckle when I remembered the day Karen strutted into my land with a margarita machine, unknowingly triggering her own downfall. Justice had been served. And for once, it wasn't slathered in barbecue sauce.